Anytime I get a chance to talk about a close friend who happened to be the greatest public intellectual in the American empire in the latter part of the 20th century, who happened to be Palestinian too.
It makes me take the notion of being an intellectual more seriously and to risk more.
When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America.
Well, let me begin by referring to something that I've already discussed. That is, if it is correct, as I believe it is, that a fundamental element of human nature is the need for creative work.
You guys are saying if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles,
right,
like freedom of speech, like we are endowed by our forefathers with an inalienable rights, like all men are created equal.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad
ideas. But Islam at this moment is the mother lode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have it.
Why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected. Now, back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not. It never has been. And you, as a journalist, are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the Dark Ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest? Seriously, it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it.
Making people bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Making them do it?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a very good idea.
But here's the argument, so should they be able to deny making a cake for a black couple if they don't like black people?
Allowed to? Probably. That doesn't mean it's right.
Okay, so then we had the civil rights movement, where they said black people, you had to serve them in your restaurants and stuff like that, and it did work, and it did make our society better, but would you argue that that still wasn't right?
No, that was right.
Yes, I'm anti-black separatism.
That's the critique.
And that's, okay, that's fine. If their criticism of me, imagine if somebody criticized me, and I'm like, oh, what's the criticism? They're like, well, you demonize Nazism. Separatism is about ethno-states, and you came in here not knowing that.
You think...
But why are you so hostile about this? It's gross, it's racist.
It's not, but it's so...
Pour de violence politique qui s'exerce dans notre société, on risque de les laisser se reconstituer, même à travers des formes aussi nobles, apparemment aussi pures que celles du syndicalisme.
If we look at this question very lack of sound, like you're certainly
there are two intellectual tasks. One that I was discussing, to try to create the vision of a future just society. Another task is to understand very clearly the nature of power and oppression and terror and destruction in our own society. And that certainly includes the institutions you mentioned, as well as the central institutions of any industrial society, namely the economic, commercial, and financial institutions.
I promise this isn't another video about plagiarism. I'm not leaping on recent discourse, and I'm not trying to ride the Hbomberguy waves. Hbomberguy waves, though, is a good band name. I trust you, my beautiful, smart audience, to trust that I am not a shameless hack like James Somerton or Illuminati. Although I guess what we've learned from the Hack Revelations is another good band name. I guess what we've learned, though, is that you probably shouldn't trust me. Regardless, though, this latest hit to the already shaky credibility of the YouTube intellectual figure does bring up some important questions about what the fuck we're even doing here. Are we intellectuals on here? I mean, Jordan Peterson really exploded on here, and he was lauded in 2018 as the most influential public intellectual. And while his influence has certainly waned since his apple cider-fueled destruction spiral and the associated weekend burying of the corpse of his legacy by his daughter, I don't think it can necessarily be easily denied that new media like YouTube and podcasts have become platforms of public intellectualism. But, like I say, this isn't just another YouTube video about YouTube. What really pushed me to consider the question of public intellectuals has been the despicable, cowardly silence violently emanating from huge numbers of academics as Palestine has been subject to genocide. These silent figures have often been highly qualified experts in decolonisation, genocide and race, and have made careers off of a progressive illusion and the study of past atrocities, yet haven't found it within themselves to vocally oppose an ongoing genocide. This dynamic has been repeated across journalistic platforms as well, with systemically biased reporting of genocide in Israel's favour.
My cousin, Aya, her 2 children, her husband, her mother-in-law, and 2 other relatives died immediately, were killed instantly, and 2 of her youngest children, a twin, 2 years old, are now in intensive care. This is truly heartbreaking. And the issue here, Kirsty, is that they have no bankers, they have no Iron Dome, they have nowhere to go. They are simply sitting ducks for the Israeli war machine.
I'm sorry for your own personal loss. I mean, can I just be clear, though? You cannot condone the killing of civilians in Israel, can you, nor the kidnapped families?
No, we don't condone, and we are very clear.
A significant factor in producing this intellectual cowardice from people who likely consider themselves public intellectuals is almost certainly the fear of reprisal from their institutions that overwhelmingly exert both ideological and material bias towards Israel. But this isn't an excuse. It is, in fact, a revealing feature of intellectual life. It reveals that many who consider themselves, and are considered to be, public intellectuals are not the free-floating Enlightenment ideal of rationality, constantly questioning the world with nothing except the pressure of their own will. Instead, public intellectualism is shaped, constrained, and, on the other hand, set in motion by the relationship to social relations of production and reproduction. James Somerton's plagiarism and shoddy work is encouraged by the capitalistic logics of YouTube. Academics and journalists are incentivized to remain silent or even just quieter by the relationships to capital logics of academia and the media, and of course the wider capitalist milieu. But these aren't the only intellectuals. In this video, I'm going to lay out my understanding of what an intellectual actually is, using Gramsci to expand it beyond the traditionally understood view of the smarty-pants lecturer to a whole host of activities which play a role in organising production through culture. I'll talk about what the actual social function to capital, the likes of Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and to some extent left-wing public intellectual figures like Vosh actually serve. Finally, I'll consider what the role, if any, left-wing intellectuals serve. How can we maybe, be considered useful to the movements we claim to speak to or for? So much of the academic work on public intellectuals, even the critical stuff, seems to end up saying, of course we still need academics like me. It's very strange how they all come to that conclusion. So let's see if that's true. So there's a few different understandings of what a public intellectual is. In common terms, it's often understood to be a figure who often, though not always, has some sort of institutional connection, to university or something. Maybe they have a fancy qualification, who speaks to a mass known as the public. Maybe they wear a turtleneck and have glasses. Classic nerdonauts.
See, he's a salt-of-the-earth guy, and the NASA nerdonauts don't understand his salt-of-the-earth ways.
I'm actually going to keep this on so that people believe what I'm saying here. Get that intellectual look. Taking off the glasses because I'm wearing my contact lenses. And that would be silly. Importantly though, this figure is able to talk on a wide variety of topics, which I think distinguishes the figure of the intellectual in this common view from the figure of the expert, who is often wheeled out to discuss an area specific to their expertise. Some famous examples of public intellectuals we could point to might be people like Jordan Peterson, Christopher Hitchens, Malcolm Gladwell, Stephen Fry, Noam Chomsky, fellow turtleneck wearer Michel Foucault. Looking sexy, brother. And Robert Oppenheimer is also often cited.
Hi, Barbie.
It's no coincidence, I think, that those figures who spring to mind as embodying the sort of ideal figure of the public intellectual are disproportionately male, white, and not disabled. This, I think, is reflective of the fact that this construction of the intellectual gadfly, flitting between topics beyond their necessary expertise, constantly questioning yet projecting certain perspectives to an audience of the public, is one born of the European Enlightenment and its associated ideals. The age of enlightenment gave birth to the public intellectual because of its revolutionary belief that through the dissemination of the fruits of philosophy and science, one could enlighten the state of public opinion and thereby replace a traditional with a rational society. Public intellectuals were those who acted on this faith by situating themselves midway between the great minds and the people, so as to serve the function of transmitting and popularizing philosophic knowledge. And this view of the intellectual is, I think, still immensely influential in structuring our collective understanding of who the intellectual is, who the public is, and how knowledge is constructed and shared. I'll get into more detail about this in the next section, but for now I think it's important to highlight that this as one of the key understandings of the intellectual and crucially of the public too. And I have a feeling we're all pretty clear on what this particular view of the public intellectual actually looks like. We can close our eyes and we can see them pretty clearly. No. Well, maybe. I guess he's kind of Jordan Peterson's Wario? But this is just one perspective. The other major perspective of what an intellectual actually is heavily influenced by friend of the channel, Antonio Gramsci. Christ, I'm gonna have to do another costume change. Putting on a hoodie. Oh, now that's sexy. There we go. That's a fucking intellectual right there. So Gramsci's incredibly influential understanding of the intellectual expands the concept well beyond the Enlightenment ideal and situates it within the social forces of production, reproduction, and culture. Rather than just a man of letters, the intellectual for Gramsci is a figure who holds a particular organizational function. Remember this organizational function because this is the essential thing I'm going to be repeating over and over again. An intellectual is someone who plays a role in organising the systems of production, politics, and culture, either in service to the hegemony or potentially in service to an emerging revolutionary counter-hegemony. Think, for example, of Andy Serkis's character in Andor, the best thing that Star Wars has ever done. And you might think that our young, beautiful, special boy Nemik is the best example of an intellectual in that show.
The pace of repression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident.
God, he's just perfect. But while he is perfect, and while I think he is an intellectual, Andy Serkis is a much better illustration of Gramsci's concept. He is a member of a social class of workers in his prison. He's an expert in how that area of production works, and he plays an organisational social role in ensuring that production takes place. He does so on behalf of the hegemonic power.
I'm the 5-2D unit manager. The 49 men in this room answer to me. Off program! Back to work!
As Gramsci says, the intellectuals are the dominant group's deputies, exercising the subaltern functions of social hegemony and political government. These comprise 1. The spontaneous consent given by the great masses of the population to the general direction imposed on social life by the dominant fundamental group. This consent is historically caused by the prestige and consequent confidence which the dominant group enjoys because of its position and function in the social world. 2. The apparatus of state coercive power which legally enforces discipline on those groups who do not consent either actively or passively. This apparatus is, however, constituted for the whole of society in anticipation of moments of crisis of command and direction when spontaneous consent has weakened. So Andy Serkis is both a disciplinarian of the imprisoned workers. He's a tool of coercive hegemonic power. But he also utilises the ideological and material tools of consent through highlighting special treatment of workers who win in a production competition with each other and bringing up the shared desire of freedom from the prison.
You play against all the other tables in this room. I play against all the other rooms. Play. You are the next man out. You are the shortest of the short. He's got 40 shifts left. So we just want something to get him through the next few days.
And interestingly, I think this can be read as ideologically reinforcing systemic capitalist competition dynamics within the micro level of the workplace setting. Circus is very literally deputized as a member of this class of people to organize production in service of hegemonic power. It's because of these organizational functional reasons that Gramsci argues that the difference between intellectuals and non-intellectuals, he says, is not an intrinsic one, but depends on their immediate social function. Anyone who carries out a role in production and reproduction can be an intellectual. However, they're not considered as such unless and until they perform that organizational social role. Yet this organizational role can be of service to both hegemonic and counter-hegemonic power. It is, for example, true that the titular Andor serves as an intellectual within this context too, except that he plays a revolutionary, a counter-hegemonic intellectual role.
Wrap that mouth if it was any longer, you'll regret it.
I'm sure you've thought about it. How many guards on each level?
He shares a lot with Circus. They're both workers, they both organise the workers, yet Andor is not deputised by the hegemonic power. He serves the interests of this group of oppressed prison workers. He makes the workers aware of their position within the realm of production. He makes it clear that the empire needs the workers for whatever they're building.
Whatever we're making here is clearly something they need. They can't afford to be surprised again.
Workers in an imperial setting building weapons of mass destruction. Sci-fi really does speak to strange worlds, doesn't it? He breaks the compulsion of competition between the workers, and he reveals that together they have the power to break free.
There'll never be less guards than tomorrow. You know that! On program!
And people are often confused, which is my passive-aggressive way of saying wrong, about Gramsci's concept of organic versus traditional intellectuals, and might look at these two figures as being examples of traditional and organic intellectuals, respectively. People have got into their heads that organic intellectuals are necessarily good and that they necessarily act against hegemonic power. But in Gramsci's formation, an organic intellectual is merely one who arises from the dominant relations of production. Capitalist entrepreneurs or political officials may be considered organic intellectuals, and traditional intellectuals, by contrast, are those who arise from the social arrangements of a previously dominant social formation. And the major example Gramsci uses is the clergy, an intellectual force that played a significant role in organising the previous relations of production, but a class which has been maintained and now plays a role in organising a new form of hegemony. I mention this not just because it annoys me when people get it wrong, but it does, but to highlight that what is essential for Gramscian understandings of the intellectual is not the aesthetic Enlightenment ideal, but the specific social function that the intellectual plays. What defines the intellectual is not by the intrinsic nature of intellectual activities per se, but from the position these activities occupy in the ensemble of the system of relations in which these activities, and therefore the intellectual groups who personify them, have their place within the general complex of social relations. And this is clear even between those we'd consider organic intellectuals. So organic intellectuals of the bourgeois class clearly hold a different social function than those of the subaltern classes. Managers play a different social function than vanguard revolutionaries. Just look at the difference between Andy and Andor. Look at the difference between Andy and Andor, until Andor, in true counter-hegemonic fashion, supplants Andy's role as the intellectual force of this group of workers.
How many guards on each level?
Never more than 12.
I'd rather die trying to take them down than die giving them what they want.
And I would rather die trying to take them down than giving them what they want. There is one way out.
He died a hero.
He was more than a hero. He was a union man.
Also, before we move on, I just want to show this clip of Brasso clobbering a cop. That's art. That is art. So here we have two understandings of the intellectual. On the one hand, we have a commonly understood figure of the public smarty-pants intellectual, derived from Enlightenment ideals, who speaks to a mass that we describe as the public, and educates them. enlightens them, brings them the gift of rationality for the betterment of rational society as a whole. And on the other hand, we have an understanding of the intellectual as someone who performs a specific organisational function within the social relations of the dominant hegemonic form of production. They don't have to be smarty-pants academics or journalists, but are often organisers of production, entrepreneurs, technicians, party officials, managers, workers. Someone who can either organise on behalf of the hegemon or against it. But that social organisational function is the most essential defining aspect of the Gramscian intellectual. Now, if you're very smart, which of course you are as you're watching this channel, I don't know what that was. If you're very smart, you might be thinking, hold on, what if these academics, these journalists, this Enlightenment ideal is playing a role in organising hegemony? And if you did think this, well done, because this is the question I've been mulling over for a long, long time now. And it brings us to trying to figure out, trying to understand the social organisational role of people like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Vosch, and maybe me. The role that we play as part of hegemony. What then is the position of the intellectuals in the general complex of social relations? They occupy, in fact, a variety of positions which are different distances from the economic base. However involved they may be in the world of production, such as technicians or managers, their relationship, unlike that of either the capitalist class or the proletariat, is always mediated to a greater or lesser extent within the realm of the superstructure. The intellectuals perform organisational and connective functions within the broader area of society or hegemony, and the area of political society or the state. So, organising the relations of production is not always a matter of playing a direct role in the productive sphere. This quote from Sassoon from this book, which is, for my money, the best introduction to Gramsci I've ever read, Sassoon, Gramsci's Politics it's called. It highlights the organisational interplay between the realm of culture and the realm of production. It allows us to go back and look at the role the smarty-pants public intellectual plays in organising system-wide productive relations. I'm going to have to change again. Hold on. Back in my intellectual garb. Oh, my hair, what a mess. So if we understand the role of the public intellectual as organisational, what does this mean for public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson or Malcolm Gladwell or whoever? And I think to make sense of this intellectual role without losing too much of our Gramscian definition, we should view the role of these people as essentially reproductive. That is, through their cultural work, they reproduce the ideological underpinnings of capitalist society, which, when realised through productive and reproductive relations, are translated into the material organisation of society. Let's take some examples to understand this. Both Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson trade on misogyny.
I don't think that anyone would say that wearing makeup to the office is in some ways like sexually deviant or something like that, or that it's inviting a sort of atmosphere of sexuality within the workplace.
I would say that. The second part, sure. It's exactly what it's doing. Okay, why else would you wear lipstick?
Shapiro's constant patriarchal projection, particularly of pro-life arguments.
Why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected. Now, back to my question to you.
And Peterson's constant framing of men as ordered, rational individuals while women are chaotic forces directly reinforces patriarchal gendered oppression throughout society. You know, if you've seen any number of my videos, or indeed Philosophy Tube's latest, you'll know that patriarchy is not just a cultural feature of the capitalist world, but is in fact indispensable to the social reproduction of capitalism in its entirety. It's about work. Capitalist production free rides on the social reproductive labour of care work, housework, cooking, cleaning, and so on, but is only able to do so because such forms of labour are systematically devalued and forcibly shouldered by women. Restricting access to abortion, for example, is one of the myriad of ways in which women can be trapped in patriarchal, often abusive situations, conditioned and forced to take part in this essential reproductive labour. And with this in mind, the systemic organisational function of bourgeois public intellectuals like Shapiro and Peterson and many others is revealed. They're not directly organising a workplace like Andy or Andor did, but they organise and reproduce the relations of oppression which are essential for the material organisation of production under capitalism. And importantly though, don't get this mixed up. Patriarchy didn't exist just because these intellectual figures project it. Rather, these individuals exist to project capitalist patriarchy ideology which emerges from the material productive relations of hegemonic society, which they then reinforce. To use a phrase I really like, they are both produced and productive. Public intellectuals like these are not free-floating intellectuals educating an undefined public, but deputised agents of class rule playing a direct, albeit cultural role in organising the wider relations of capitalist production. They play this role not just for patriarchy, which I'm using just to illustrate the point here, but also through racism, transphobia, anti-immigration, ableism and homophobia, all of which play a role in the material organisation of capitalist production and capital accumulation. And another aspect of this is the way they actually project knowledge. Public intellectuals like Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and nominally left-wing intellectuals like Vosch utilise an Enlightenment ideal of knowledge production. Peterson projects a particular masculinist image, the intellectual clothes, the use of language, the assuredness, the classical figure of the intellectual. Does this joke work 3 times? Does it work on the 3rd time? I don't know. And while he is often emotional, in his most famous interviews, like the one with Channel 4's Cathy Newman, he projects a kind of detached, unemotional rationality which was contrasted against Newman's irrational femininity. And you just need to look at the hundreds of react videos to this interview to see the kind of misogyny that was mobilised and get an impression of the effect this projected contrast has. Shapiro similarly performs a kind of faux hyper-rationality.
These are facts, and facts don't care about your feelings.
His entire rhetorical mode is a product of a vulgarised Enlightenment ideal whereby facts are spouted as a weapon of domination against the unenlightened. So leaving aside the content of these dubious facts spouted by Shapiro like a wet fart machine gun. Is that a good band name? Is Wet Fart Machine Gun a good band? No. The very form of this hyper-rationality also reproduces the cultural force of capitalist rationality. As Caroline Merchant argues in The Death of Nature, Cartesian rationality was instrumental as part of the subjugation of women under capitalism. Women were separated off as part of the affective, innately placid, caring natural world, ready to be dominated and domesticated by the rational man. And this ideological force, of course, plays an organisational role in maintaining the social reproductive labour division upon which capitalist hegemony rests. When figures like Ben Shapiro elevate this kind of faux Cartesian hyper-rationality, they are packaging their machine-gunned wet farts in a misogynistic form which itself is part of the cultural organisation of hegemonic productive forces. And it is, I think, no coincidence that the form of the debate which elevates this kind of hyper-rationality on both the debate participants and the audience who watches is a common arena of public intellectualism, both online and off. This implies that it's not just the right-wing public intellectual that plays such an organisational role for hegemonic power, but the entire class of public intellectualism itself. Remember, public intellectualism here is distinct from the intellectualism of the direct workplace. So, in the content they produce, the images they project, and the forms of knowledge they produce, these kinds of public intellectuals play an organisational role in reproducing and organising class divisions within society. This extends well beyond just the right-wing public intellectual, but to the form of public intellectualism itself. At least, public intellectualism which utilises the tools of Enlightenment rationality. For example, to use a very chill example that I'm sure no one will get mad at, when streamers like Vosch spend their time projecting their form of Shapiro-style intellectualism, spouting facts and logics to dominate their opponents, utilising a kind of masculinist rationality, utilising tactical slurs, like they may use some progressive talking points, but the talking points are packaged in a form of knowledge production which serves to organise hegemonic production. Intellectuals who engage in this form of public intellectualism are, in my view, bourgeois intellectuals. They are bourgeois intellectuals because they reproduce and organise bourgeois class power. And yet, they often try to obscure this by talking as if they speak to or for an undifferentiated whole. The public, the people, they frequently make appeals to the mass of people they speak to. And in fact, they often brag about it. In terms of book sales or subscriber counts, it doesn't matter who these subscribers are. It doesn't matter what social role the supporters fill, whether it's bourgeois or proletariat, revolutionary or reactionary. They are one mass, one public, one audience. And this, I think, is one of the underappreciated aspects of modern public intellectuals. You know, several people have tried to problematize this concept of the public, either pointing out that it's not an undifferentiated mass or actually bemoaning that it is becoming an undifferentiated mass. But I think the concept of the public, and therefore the role of the public intellectual, serves a specific function in this organizational role of the intellectual. You know, according to Gramsci, one of the ideological tricks of hegemony is projecting, why did I say it like that? Tricks? Like I'm the Joker. A Joker in a turtleneck. Again, a good bad name. According to Gramsci, one of the ideological tricks of hegemony is projecting an ideal of a national community, which obscures the deep class divisions required to maintain capital accumulation. When figures like Shapiro or Peterson are claiming to speak to or for the undifferentiated mass of the public, they are themselves recreating this ideological trick. They are obscuring the deep class divisions which permeate society, not just between the bourgeois and the proletariat classes, but within those classes too. And this is in service, again, to hegemonic power. If we are all the public, then maybe class divisions just aren't that important. And this, of course, links back to the notion of enlightening this mass public. Gramsci often speaks of an educational role of hegemony, which isn't just schooling, but, you guessed it, in organising society to serve the hegemon, and constructing a mass public to then enlighten overwhelmingly in one direction, from elite to mass.
Have you talked to adults? There's everyone. You think, what? Oh, I talk to black people and black subjects. Everyone. Race. Doesn't matter. White, black. They're all idiots. All of them. You can't base your opinion on an ideology based on cordial conversations you've had with a few people.
We are projecting an ideal of unity within the mass public. We are smoothing over the divisions of society, obscuring its essential nature. This, I think, is another feature of public intellectualism which makes it difficult to rescue as a concept. So long as those of us who exist publicly construct an undifferentiated public to speak to, then we're reproducing an organisational, ideological projection of hegemonic power. Who we are talking to and who we are seeking to organise are essential questions. And I think this is one of the things that makes some left-wing figures who claim to speak to a hypothetical median man on the street such limited figures for any left-wing movement. When people talk about pushing the public to the left, they are themselves reconstructing this ideal which, when actually analysed, is fairly meaningless, but which serves the function of smoothing over societal class divisions. And of course, this invocation of talking to the public, as a whole, often comes with the exclusions of people in deciding who counts as the public, whether that's the patriarchy or white supremacy of the right, or the invocations of woke scolds and shit like that from left figures like Vosh, which is to say, patriarchy and white supremacy on the left. We shouldn't be pushing this mythic of the public to the left, but organising specific oppressed classes to overthrow hegemony. You, my audience, are not the public. I'm not speaking to you as if you are an undifferentiated mass, eliding its innate exclusion. I'm assuming that you are not made up of reactionaries, managers, capitalists, and therefore I try to tailor my work to pushing revolutionary rhetoric. I mean, if you are a right-winger, a reactionary, and you're here, I hope you're having fun. I hope you're getting something from it. But I can't just expand my audience reach through using what I perceive as mass appeal, by utilising the knowledge production of the bourgeois intellectual, which itself organises bourgeois class power, by shortcutting my way to further reach, and further personal wealth with the easily accessible modes of ideological class power. It's easy to make money when you shit on, oppressed classes and say that you're speaking from the left. It's easy. And the reason it's easy is because it's hegemonic. It's obviously easier to be successful in terms of growing your audience, in terms of growing your income, if you sink yourself within hegemonic power, for the simple fact that you will be supported through the avenues of domination in society. The hegemony will support you. The structures of YouTube will support you. But I don't know if I can actually successfully reject such forms of public intellectualism in a world of ever-increasing commodification. Can I survive on YouTube or in academia without being forced to speak to the public as a mass, to use forms of oppressive knowledge productions? These questions lead us to ask, and so we return to the figures of progressive left-wing public intellectuals. The questions I've been preoccupied with in the wake of the hack shit from James Somerton, in the wake of academics crossing picket lines during strikes, and in the wake of academic silence over Palestinian genocide is firstly... I burped there. Okay, we'll do that take again. Firstly, why are there so many failures? And secondly, is there a way to overcome the failures, or should we seek simply to abolish ourselves, which is going to be the new TikTok way to get past the censors? Abolish yourself. You should abolish yourself, actually. Replying to tweets from now on saying you should abolish yourself. I'm focusing on left public intellectuals on YouTube and in academia here for reasons. What? But while it's true that I'm making my personal anxieties your problem, I also think that these are both valuable spheres to examine the trends which I think inhibit the production of counter-hegemonic public intellectualism, namely the sharp forces of commodification at play, the ease with which those who are distant from counter-hegemonic organising can claim to speak on those very topics, and the tendency to reproduce bourgeois forms of knowledge production. Let's start with YouTube, given the recent H-bomb explosion. If you mystically don't know what happened here, basically a pretty well-known YouTuber who did a lot of queer theory videos turned out to be a massive plagiarist and a scammer. He made tons of money ripping off other people and essentially scamming them. There's no real mystery in why this happened. Money. You wanted money. But I think it's useful in illustrating the systemic pressures in producing truly counter-hegemonic intellectual figures. Because what struck me about Somerton, after not seeing any of his content before, was just how shoddy it was. Like, never mind that it was stolen work cobbled together like Frankenstein's monster, the actual production quality on those videos was terrible. And I know my production isn't exactly gleaming, but he was bringing in more money a month than I do in a year, and yet his production quality was so poor. And what this really highlighted is that what's probably the most defining factor in monetary success on YouTube is just posting. It's just posting lots. YouTube makes money from posting. It makes money from people like me uploading more and more content for the machine. We're a commodity that YouTube sells to you. And as such, it needs to encourage us to pump out more and more content into the machine. Gross. I can actually see my income decline precipitously the further and further from an upload we get, and of course this encourages bad intellectual work, whether it's under-researched or just stolen. The platform pressures of YouTube encourage this shoddy work. I've spoken about this effect on YouTube knowledge production before, but what I want to highlight is I think the enmeshment of YouTubers into the hyper-competitive content mill might be making us into very specifically bourgeois organic intellectuals. We become experts in how to organise the production of content. It is often an individualistic, impersonal form of productive organisation, but we become intellectuals in organising that field of production, our field of production. We learn how to interact with other creators, how to dunk, how to engage, how to sell ourselves. Remember to like and subscribe, hit the bell, join my Patreon, hit the tip jar. If you do this ironically, you can still do a call to action while making you seem like cool and subversive to the audience, and drawing attention to that, the fact that I'm doing it in cool and subversive and ironically, means that I can seem even more detached, ironic, likable, get more people to sign up to the patrons, get more people to do it. Then again, drawing attention to that makes it seem even more subversive. I'm subversing it all and making myself seem even more likable, even more like I'm not actually doing the thing I'm actually doing, which is a call to action because I need to make money, but I'm still doing it. And crucially, how to organise you, the mass audience, for the means of content creation. This involves reproducing some of the exact dynamics of audience creation and elite dictation as the bourgeois intellectual figures of Peterson and Shapiro project. And I worry that YouTube as a sphere of content commodity production severely limits what we can actually do on this platform, and whether we're inadvertently organising a specifically neoliberal form of hegemonic social relations. In the absence of such decommodified public spheres, it becomes more difficult for citizens to challenge the neoliberal myth that citizens are merely consumers, and that wholly unregulated markets are the sole means by which we can produce and distribute everything we care about, from durable goods to spiritual values, from capital development to social justice, from profitability to sustainable environments, from private wealth to essential common weal. As democratic values give way to commercial values, intellectual ambitions are often reduced to an instrument of the entrepreneurial self, and social visions are dismissed as hopelessly out of date. Public space is portrayed exclusively as an investment opportunity, and the public good increasingly becomes a metaphor for public disorder. That is, as any notion of the public becomes synonymous with disrepair, danger and risk, for example, public schools, public transportation, public parks, and so on. Within this discourse, anyone who does not believe that the rapacious capitalism is the only road to freedom and the good life is dismissed as either a crank or worse. Worse, a YouTuber. Selling revolution as content commodities may be playing a role in organising people as consumers rather than as members of oppressed classes. Buy my content, subscribe to my Patreon, that's the revolution. And of course, drawing attention to this sort of trend means that I can still say subscribe to my Patreon while still pretending that I'm playing part of the revolution and still ironically detaching myself from it, but still doing in the current historical conjuncture, dominated by capitalism, white supremacy and patriarchy, modes of attention are constituted and framed through spectacle. Given their embeddedness in capitalist markets, public intellectuals are as subject as others within a polity to the logic of commodity fetishism and spectacle. Moreover, such is the cunning of capitalists that the very idea of the public intellectual itself becomes a commodity. Subscribe to Patreon now. Take the tip jar. I need to keep making content or I will die in the streets. See, now I can do the same joke in a rule of threes while still getting people to actually do the call to action. So I'm still doing this thing, and even though I'm pointing out I'm sort of lampshading it in a way, and it's killed. James Somerton effectively did this for his scam, where he organised a lot of queer supporters to support him and his career, to support his and YouTube's realm of production, and he sort of did it through the lens of supporting queer creatives. I kind of mobilizing a revolutionary rhetoric. And I do worry that maybe I'm doing that myself. To be honest, I am proud of a lot of the work I do here, but I don't know how much that work can effectively escape from the cloying hands of commodification. And it's not just on YouTube. As the academy becomes ever increasingly a realm of commodification and competition, so do academics become enmeshed within capital logics, ever more enmeshed. They were never free of it, but things are bad out there. Things are getting worse. While competition in the academy preceded the introduction of neoliberalism, unbridled competition is now celebrated. Competition and charisma are crucial to becoming a big brand and other market growth aspirations, with academics positioned to compete with each other to become viable academic subjects. If contemporary academics feel like they have landed on a perverse version of the X Factor, they can be forgiven. Like contestants on the reality show, academics must vie for a position through slick performances expected to win a job in these freshly corporatized academies. While X Factor singers face the metrics of iTunes, academics face the race to improve their publicly listed H factors and citation counts. These are the sources of evidence that most count, For both groups, charisma, flexibility, and receptivity to neoliberal feedback is expected. And so there's quite a clear consistency between this description of the academy and YouTube. We are being organised in both spheres to compete as producers of intellectual commodities, and we, in turn, organise audiences as consumers of those commodities. A relationship to bourgeois hegemony is both produced by it and productive of it. Never is this clearer than with those supposedly radical academics who type massive threads justifying why it's okay for them to be a scab, to break picket lines, or when decolonial scholars stay silent on colonial genocide happening in Palestine right now. The reason these things happen is because academics are often precarious and are scared of losing their jobs or their book deals for striking or for speaking out. They've been effectively organised by the intellectual, organisational strata of university managers to value their careers over the movements they've often profited from. And by justifying scabbing or staying silent on genocide, they're effectively contributing to an organisational force which prioritises the maintenance of hegemony. They're reproducing the very competitive dynamics which are oppressing them, produced and productive. Just think, what purpose does writing a Twitter thread justifying scabbing during an academic strike hold? It's organisational. It projects an organisational force that existing in the academy, maintaining your job is more important than taking industrial action. Like if you just find that you just absolutely have to scab, simply don't justify it in a public setting. That act is a bourgeois intellectual act. And contrastingly, staying silent on Palestine for fear of losing out on jobs or book deals, which is a real fear. People have lost jobs over this. Staying silent also projects an organisational bourgeois force. Both project an idea that maintaining your position in the academy, getting an edge over a colleague that doesn't strike or doesn't speak out, that writing books and papers is more important than standing up in the face of oppression. And let's face it, the more people who stay silent on Palestine or justify scabbing, the more people will be afraid to strike or to speak up and remain in lockstep with the institutional ideals of the academy. These acts are organisational on behalf of the bourgeois class, and that is what these academic cowards really are. Bourgeois intellectuals. But I don't want to necessarily paint a wholly negative picture.
Bourgeois intellectuals. Academic covered.
Many academics have spoken out and did take part in strike action, and I recently signed a letter put together by genocide scholar Raz Siegel condemning the genocide in Palestine. The force of capital on YouTube and in the academy is strong, but it's not absolute. Several radical public intellectual figures have themselves highlighted the potentially progressive role of the academic. Pierre Bourdieu, for example, believed that academics were indispensable given their rigorous competencies as researchers, writers, and teachers to creating the pedagogical conditions that both furthered social and economic justice and challenged the forms of symbolic and material domination that was being exercised globally, especially under the control of neoliberalism. Rejecting the commonplace assumption that academic work should be separate from the operations of politics, he reclaimed the role of the intellectual as an engaged social agent and maintained that intellectuals have a fearsome form of social responsibility. What I think is the most useful element to bring out of this quote, to bring out that from Bourdieu, is that he believed that academics could be useful when they merge their academic work with that of the movement. And that is, it's not enough just to write on a thing. You have to, following Gramsci, take an active role in organising. Hold on, I need to do another costume change. My picket vest. 3 costume changes, 4 costume changes in a fucking video. Eat your heart out, Abby. So I think another reason why academics might fail to speak up for Palestine or not scab on their own industrial strikes is that many of them view their engagement with progress solely through the production of knowledge commodities for the university. It's the same for YouTubers like Somerton or several others I can think of. Because their entire intellectual output is commodified, they only know how to organise around the logic of commodification. That is, the logic of hegemony. To break out of that requires not just engagement within radical movements, but commitment to them. You can't scab your union, or stay silent in the face of genocide, or rip off other queer creators for profit, or lead racist harassment campaigns if you're actively committed to the project of liberation. It's not just about becoming an expert in what those movements do that's important, but about being constrained in what the public intellectual will compromise to the hegemonic logic of the institution in which they operate, whether that is academia or YouTube or journalism for that matter. And furthermore, by being committed to the movement, we can allow ourselves to be shaped by the myriad of intellectuals who are organising every day, whether that is resisting landlords, bosses, immigration policies, the police, ableist welfare regimes, and so much more. We can remove the firm distinction between audience and intellectual and move further towards becoming intellectual expressions of the movement. But this still leaves space for the actual form of knowledge produced by public intellectuals to be shaped by hegemonic logic and used to organise society in its image. Is it possible to break out of that? Edward Said's solution to this kind of problem was a call for amateurism. And that doesn't mean a lack of knowledge or care, rather that he believed that to be a progressive force as a public intellectual, to be free of the pressures of the academy, to relentlessly criticise in the face of injustice, to be a bad bitch, required taking the role of public intellectualism outside of the profession. This, he argues, is the principal intellectual duty of the intellectual, the search for relative independence from such pressures. Hence my characterisation of the intellectual as exile and marginal, as amateur and as the author of a language that tries to speak truth to power. Being an amateur would definitely alleviate some of the worry of subscriber counts, of views, of Patreon subscriptions, of money. It would alleviate the pressures of meeting research assessment goals and allow you to push more forcefully to try and engage in revolutionary organising. But I just don't know if such amateurism is possible on YouTube. Unless I get another job which pays extremely well but still leaves me with the time necessary to put in all the research to produce what I view as reliable work and somehow keeps the reach that I have intact. How can I do this as an amateur? How can any of us? When the entire world is mediated by the organising force of hegemonic commodity logic, how can we remove ourselves from it? I don't think we can, but, I don't think that means all of us on YouTube or academia are doomed to necessarily be reactionary. I'm not saying that we need to exist, that we're essential for the movement. Like and subscribe. It doesn't work at fourth time. Rule of threes. But insofar as we have any value, it's predicated on constantly and consciously pushing back against the pressures of the platforms and institutions in which we exist. Part of that requires constant critique and a level of mistrust for those who we presume to speak to. In short, a degree of accountability. I think it's probably also predicated on us trying to organise our own sectors. YouTube is notoriously difficult to unionise, and I suspect that it will never happen. But in the university, in journalism, in the media, those who presume to be public intellectuals of the left need to be fighting to organise against their managers and the constant commodification of their realms. We need to be part of the movement, not set apart from it. And only then will we ever stop constantly disappointing everyone around us, everyone who's ever put any trust in us. When I was doing my final PhD thesis defence, my licence to access the world of academia and call myself important, my examiners asked me, John, your conclusions seem, far more concerned, far more focused with the world of activism than laying out any contribution to research or knowledge in the academy. What was your thinking there? And I was like, oh fuck, I didn't even realise. And then I was like, so what's the point? Because what is the point? What is the point of producing this? What is the point of producing all these words, all these books, all these papers, all these tweets, all these TikToks, these endless tweets? I don't want to do this stuff just to make money or get a position. I enjoy it as a job, but I do actually care about the movement. I do actually want to make some sort of impact. But I think part of that is recognising just how limited the acts of the academic or the YouTuber can be in the wider cultural organisation of production. We can try to project counter-hegemonic social analysis to disrupt the organisation of production. We can push ourselves to be committed to the movement of radical politics, but the forces of capital which constrain us are extremely powerful. Lots of academics justify their role with reference to revolutionary activist scholars, intellectuals like Walter Rodney. But we can't all be Walter Rodney, and I really, really doubt that a lot of people who invoke him are even close. There can't be that many Walter Rodneys wandering around the academy. Something would have exploded. In fact, I've been thinking for a while that the internal institutional role of radical academic union organising should ultimately be organising for the abolition of the university as an institution. Like a good organiser does, maybe we should be fighting to no longer exist, to move education over to the intellectuals who are less public and less platformed, to move it to those intellectuals we could maybe label as the revolutionary vanguard, the ones who emerge from organising radical spaces. And I think this might be the same for YouTube. So, are we intellectuals on here? I think so. I don't think that's necessarily good. Like, I don't want to exaggerate my own importance. I don't think I'm the revolution. I don't think I'm stopping the revolution either. Nothing is hinging on this small YouTube channel. I just want to reflect on my actual role here. Like, if you want to watch me just for entertainment, that's fine. You must be an incredibly boring person and I'm not sure I want to meet you, but that's fine. It's part of the YouTuber's intellectual role to know how to build an audience, and that means insulting them as boring. But I think it's inescapable that I play some form of public intellectual role, and far from being some sort of snivelling self-congratulatory label, I think this might be something worth criticising, and I don't think we can just hide behind the labels of entertainers or edutainment to absolve ourselves of responsibility. In the UK, a particularly weird character called David Baddiel has labelled himself as an intellectual, and I'm not sure he realises what that actually means his social role is. He probably just likes thinking of himself as like a big important guy. But to me it seems like a social role which should be constantly worried over. If you're not constantly questioning whether you're serving the movement, then more likely than not you're probably serving hegemonic power. And perhaps there's some valuable nugget from the Enlightenment ideal of the intellectual. The Enlightenment viewed the intellectual as always questioning, unabashed questioning of the world. And it's true that public intellectuals should do this, but to reframe it, I think it's more important that you do this. Constantly question the role that people like me and Vosh and James Somerton and academics play in reproducing hegemony. If we're not useful, drop us. To paraphrase Edward Said, intellectuals always fail. When we do, it's the movements who should take us to task, so that we don't fail the movement. You know, unless you just want to watch me for entertainment, in which case, like and subscribe and go to Patreon and blah 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 blah. Great jokes. You should sign up though, I am poor. Alright, thanks for watching everyone. I'm going to get through these Patreon names as quick as possible because I'm desperate to keep this under an hour. I'm not going to do a video over an hour, I swear to God. So here are the $10 patrons who get their names read out. Love them all. Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Soval Hayes, Bonnie, Kate Marshall, Nina G Public Relations, FD Signifier, Lizzie G, Quint Wolf, Kim Crawley, Anita Anispi, Ellis Wren, Sophie, Hey Joe, Cameron Blakemore, Misling, Dash, Layum, Xander Corbus, Theo Westfall, Christopher Poff, Morgussi, Daniel Cusid, Joshua Moldenhauer, Tom Price, Cade Soiree, Esoteric Fictionalism, Austin Talman, Robin, Rachel Mixon, Michelle H, Rich, Duncan Skinner, Niels Abildgaard, Tinfoil Pancakes, Kieran Gore, Aga Ghost, Barney Carroll, Joe, Daniel Hughes, Nelly Jacheva, J. Fraser Cartwright, Aaron, Tamesh Kispiter, and Paul Singleton. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm quite pleased with how this one turned out. I've got to say, I think it's quite fun, quite interesting. If you like to share it and sign up to Patreon, as the jokes and the not the fake jokes that I really hope people take on board say, because I need to eat. And yeah, happy holiday season, as I will say, to make the Conservatives go mad and wage my war on Christmas. Bye, love you all, bye.